Chapter 1. Waterloo to Mimban, the mud of defeat. The sky above the swamplands of Mimban cracked open, revealing a raw bleeding wound in the fabric of reality. It was not a breach born of hyperspace, but a violent tear from a time and place far removed from the logic of this galaxy. Napoleon Bonaparte fell not like a man, but like a titan cast down from Olympus, his body slamming into the thick, suffocating sludge of an alien world. The roar of cannons at Waterloo was instantly replaced by the high-pitched shriek of ionization and the guttural thrum of repulsor lifts. He gasped, his lungs filling with air that tasted wrong metallic chemical and devoid of the familiar sulfur of black powder. He scrambled to his knees, his pristine white breeches instantly stained by the gray, oily muck of the Mimbanese trenches. Around him, the world was on fire. Beams of crimson light slashed through the perpetual fog, incinerating trees and flesh alike. He saw men in white plastoid armor charging blindly into a tree line, only to be cut down by guerrilla fighters emerging from the mud. It was chaos. It was madness. It was war. Napoleon wiped the grime from his eyes, his hand trembling not from fear, but from the adrenaline of a battle he did not understand. He stood his silhouette small against the towering canopy of fungal trees. To his left, a metal behemoth, a two-legged walker, stomped through the mire, its pivoting head raining green fire upon the screaming locals. A lesser man would have cowered. Napoleon merely narrowed his eyes. "Cavalry," he muttered, his voice a rasping whisper amidst the cacophony. Unsupported, exposed flanks, amateurish. He moved with a purpose that defied his disorientation, wading through the sludge toward a crater where a ragtag group of soldiers lay huddled. They were a mix of species humans with desperate eyes and aliens with chitinous skin wearing mismatched armor, clearly deserters or separated units. They fired their weapons blindly over the lip of the crater, wasting energy, wasting opportunity. Napoleon slid into the crater, the sudden intrusion startling the nearest soldier, a human with a scarred face. The soldier raised his blaster, but hesitated. There was something in the short stranger's eyes, a terrifying icy clarity that froze the trigger finger. Napoleon ignored the weapon pointed at his chest. He looked at the chaotic skirmish ahead, observing the enemy's advance. The white-armored soldiers were moving in a rigid line, perfect targets for enfilade fire, yet these fools in the crater were shooting at the walker's thickest armor plating. "This weapon fires light," Napoleon barked, his voice cutting through the din of battle with the authority of 100 campaigns. He gestured violently at the blaster rifle in the soldier's hand. "But the wielder is tactically blind. Give me that spyglass." The soldier blinked, confused by the strange accent, and the command issuing from a man dressed in the tattered uniform of a 19th century general. "Who are you?" The soldier stammered, lowering his weapon slightly. "A lost Imperial officer. You're going to get us killed." Napoleon snatched the electro-binoculars from the soldier's belt before the man could protest. He brought them to his eyes, scanning the ridge. He saw the officer of the white-armored troops standing tall, arrogant, gesturing with a gloved hand. He saw the walker's joint mechanisms exposed and rhythmic. He saw the geometry of the battlefield, a grid of vectors and morale that only he could read. He lowered the binoculars and looked down at the men. "I am the Emperor Napoleon," declared his voice low, but vibrating with an intensity that made the ground seem to shake more than the artillery. "And you are dying of ignorance." He did not wait for their acceptance. He grabbed the nearest alien by its shoulder harness and pointed toward a cluster of rock formations to the right flank. "You and your 3 companions, move to that defilade. Do not fire until I give the signal. Aim for the knee joints of the machine. The rest of you," he turned to the humans, "fix bayonets, or whatever passes for close quarters attachments on these toys. We draw their fire here." The sheer audacity of the command stunned them into obedience. It was the instinct of the prey recognizing a predator who knew how to hunt. They moved. For the first time in this muddy hell, they moved with coordination. The ATST walker turned its mechanical head toward the crater, sensing movement. The Imperial pilot inside saw only a small group of desperate rebels. He did not see the trap. As the walker stepped forward, sinking slightly into the soft earth, Napoleon raised his hand. He stood fully exposed on the crater's edge, his gray overcoat flapping in the wind of the blaster bolts whizzing past him. He was a statue of defiance, a lighthouse in a storm of plasma. "Wait," he whispered, timing the walker's stride, watching the leg extend. "Wait." The walker committed its weight to the front leg. "Fee you," Napoleon roared. From the rocks on the flank, the alien soldiers opened fire. Concentrated red bolts slammed into the unarmored gyroscope of the walker's knee. The metal sheared and sparked. The machine shrieked a sound of tearing duress steel and lurched violently. Its balance lost, the multi-ton war machine toppled sideways, crashing into the mud with the force of a falling cathedral. The impact sent a shockwave of sludge washing over the battlefield. The white-armored stormtroopers halted, their heavy support gone, their formation broken by the sudden catastrophe. Panic, the oldest enemy of discipline, rippled through their ranks. "Charge!" Napoleon screamed, drawing his ceremonial saber, a useless shard of steel in a galaxy of lasers. Yet in this moment, it shone like a beacon of victory. The deserters in the crater surged forward, their morale ignited by the impossible sight of the fallen Titan. They cut down the retreating stormtroopers, their fear replaced by a bloodthirsty roar. Napoleon did not run with them. He walked. He walked across the churning battlefield, his boots heavy with the mud of a new world, stepping over the burning white armor of the enemy. He reached the wreckage of the ATST. The pilot was dragging himself out of the hatch, coughing. Napoleon watched dispassionately as one of his new soldiers finished the Imperial off. The battle was over. The skirmish was won. Napoleon bent down and picked up an E-11 blaster rifle from a dead stormtrooper. It was light plastic, ugly. It lacked the elegance of a musket, the weight of history. He turned it over in his hands, examining the power cell. He raised it, aiming at a distant flying creature circling in the gloom. He pulled the trigger. A bolt of red energy sizzled through the air, instant and lethal. "No reloading," Napoleon murmured, a dark smile touching his lips as he looked up at the star-filled sky where triangular destroyers hung like daggers. Interesting. Chapter 2. The Little Corporal of the Outer Rim. The caverns of Mimban were a festering wound in the earth, a labyrinth of dripping limestone and bioluminescent fungi that served as a sanctuary for the dregs of the galaxy. Here, deserters, smugglers, and refugees huddled together, united only by the damp cold and the fear of the Imperial patrols above. But tonight, the atmosphere in the cavern had shifted. It was no longer a place of hiding. It was becoming a barracks. Napoleon Bonaparte paced the perimeter of the central campfire, his boots clicking rhythmically against the wet stone. He had discarded his ruined coat, now wearing a modified chest piece of plastoid armor over his stained waistcoat, a jarring fusion of two eras. He looked at the motley crew assembled before him. Rhodians cleaning their weapons with dirty rags, humans arguing over ration packs, and a massive Wookiee growling in his sleep. To Napoleon, they were not people. They were raw materials. "Silence!" Napoleon's voice snapped like a whip, echoing off the cavern walls. The chatter died down instantly. He did not shout, yet his command filled the space. "You sit there picking at your teeth while your weapons rust. You are not soldiers. You are rubble waiting to be swept away." He walked to the center, kicking a crate of stolen blaster power packs. "Discipline. That is the only god we worship here. Without it, You are dead men walking. From this moment, there are no individuals. There is only the Grand Battery. A low growl emerged from the shadows. A hulking Wike, the self-proclaimed leader of this bandit cell before Napoleon's arrival, stepped into the firelight. His skin was leathery and scarred, and he twirled a vibro knife with practiced menace. The other refugees held their breath. This was the challenge they had been waiting for. "You talk too much, little man," the Wike sneered, towering over the former emperor. "You got lucky with the walker. But down here, I give the orders. I say we take your shiny new blaster and leave your corpse for the rats." Napoleon did not flinch. He did not reach for the pistol at his belt. He merely looked up, his gray eyes analyzing the Wike with the detached curiosity of a scientist dissecting an insect. He calculated the distance, the grip on the knife, the flickering shadows cast by the fire. "You hold that blade like a butcher, not a duelist," Napoleon said softly. He took a single step forward, invading the Wike's personal space, radiating such immense confidence that the large alien hesitated. "Look around you. 10 rifles are currently aimed at your back, not because I ordered them to, but because they know I can lead them to victory. You can only lead them to a shallow grave." The Wike blinked his eyes, darting nervously to the shadows where the deserters from the crater stood. Blasters raised, their loyalty already shifted to the man who had killed a walker. Napoleon smiled, a cold, humorless expression. "Sit down, citizen, or be removed from the equation." The knife clattered to the stone floor. The transfer of power was absolute. "An army travels on its stomach," Napoleon declared later, standing before a flickering holographic map that bathed his face in a ghostly blue light. The map showed the surrounding sectors of the mine, imperial supply depots, ventilation shafts, and patrol routes. He pointed a gloved finger at a blinking red dot. "We do not raid for credits. We raid for protein, for carbohydrates, for power cells. Tomorrow we take this depot. But we do not run in screaming. We march." He turned to the group, his gaze intense. "If you are hungry, you fight with desperation. I do not want desperation. I want precision. We will secure the food, then we will secure the perimeter, and then you will learn how to shoot." The training that followed in the subsequent days was brutal. In the muddy expanse of the largest cavern, Napoleon drilled them relentlessly. He stripped them of their chaotic skirmish tactics. No longer did they fire at will. He organized them into ranks, teaching them the concept of the volley. "Wait for the command," he roared as a dozen species stood shoulder to shoulder, facing a painted target on the cavern wall. "Aim, stabilize your breathing, FEU." A synchronized wall of red plasma erupted, turning the rock face into slag. It was not the rapid-fire suppression of modern warfare. It was a hammer blow, a single concentrated punch designed to overwhelm shields and armor through sheer mass of energy. Watching from the corner was a battered B-1 series tactical droid, its rusted chassis specifically rewired by a tech-savvy refugee. Its photoreceptors whirred as it observed the drills. It watched the soldiers form a tight infantry square, kneeling in the front, standing in the back, creating a porcupine of blaster barrels to repel the native mud wolves that plagued the caves. The droid's processor clicked audibly. It shuffled toward Napoleon, its mechanical head tilting. Analysis, the droid buzzed, its voice distorted by static. "Commander, this formation, the infantry square, is obsolete. It is highly vulnerable to thermal detonators and area of effect weaponry. Probability of success against modern imperial tactics, 4.2%. Napoleon polished the lens of his spyglass, not looking up. "And against the biological threats of this planet, against charging beasts, against an enemy that arrogantly assumes we will scatter." The droid paused, its internal fans spinning up as it ran the new variables. Recalculating. against melee engagement and unsupported infantry charges. Effectiveness rating, 99%. The droid's head sparked. Logic conflict. Strategy is archaic, yet optimal. Does not compute. War is not mathematics machine, Napoleon said, finally looking at the droid. It is art, and I am the artist. Now get back in line. Even a machine can hold a rifle. Chapter 3. The Grand Battery of Mimban. The valley was a cauldron of gray mist, the air thick with the humidity of the swamp, and the electric tension of imminent violence. It was here, in this natural funnel of rock and sludge, that Napoleon chose his ground. He stood atop a ridge overlooking the basin, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the white shapes emerge from the fog like ghosts. An Imperial company over 100 stormtroopers, flanked by 2 AT-ST walkers. They moved with the arrogant swagger of an army that had never known true defeat, only insurgency. To the modern commanders of this galaxy, this valley was a killing box to be rushed through with speeders and air support. To Napoleon, it was a chessboard. He had spent the last 10 hours forcing his motley army to drag every heavy weapon they possessed, stolen E-Web heavy repeating blasters, erratic mortars, and salvaged rotary cannons, up to this single elevated ridgeline. The Grand Battery, he called it. His soldiers had cursed him as they hauled the heavy durasteel through the mud. But now, looking down at the exposed enemy, they fell silent. Steady, Napoleon murmured, his voice carried by the wind to his lieutenants. They believe we are savages hiding in holes. Let them believe it. Below, the Imperial officer shouted a command. The stormtroopers fanned out their boots, squelching in the deep, deceptive mire that Napoleon had scouted hours before. The AT-STs took the lead, their mechanical legs struggling for purchase in the viscous clay. They were top-heavy, clumsy beasts, formidable on pavement, but pathetic in the mud. Napoleon watched them with a sneer. Heavy cavalry without support. A fatal error. The lead walkers spotted movement on the ridge, a decoy flag flapping in the wind. Its chin-mounted twin blaster cannons spun and opened fire, sending streaks of crimson energy tearing into the rocks. The stormtroopers cheered, rushing forward, thinking the rebels were pinned. They ran straight into the mire. The mud, deep and unforgiving, sucked at their greaves, slowing their charge to a crawl. The AT-STs wobbled their gyro stabilizers, whining in protest as they tried to navigate the shifting ground. Now, Napoleon whispered. He raised his gloved hand high. Align sights on the walkers. Ignore the infantry. Break the horses and the riders will fall. 30 heavy weapons arranged wheel to wheel in a dense line, swiveled in unison. It was a concentration of firepower rarely seen in small-scale galactic skirmishes, where tactics usually dictated spreading out to avoid grenades. Here, density was king. Attendez. Napoleon held the moment, letting the enemy commit fully to the kill zone. The hum of the charging E-Web generators grew to a whine. FU, the ridge erupted. It was not a series of individual shots. It was a solid wall of coherent light. The volley slammed into the lead AT-ST with the force of a hammer striking a bell. Shields flared and collapsed instantly under the sheer volume of fire. The armor plating designed to deflect scattered shots melted under the sustained focused heat of 30 heavy weapons, hitting the same square meter of durasteel. What is happening? The Imperial lieutenant screamed into his comlink, ducking as the air above him turned into a superheated vacuum. They're not scattering. They're firing in line. It's a solid wall of energy. He watched in horror as the first AT-ST, its cockpit slagged into a molten ruin, collapsed forward. It crushed a squad of stormtroopers beneath its bulk, hissing as the hot metal met the wet mud. The second walker tried to turn its pilot, panicking, but the mud held it fast. The Grand Battery shifted its aim with terrifying discipline. Thump, thump, thump. The mortars, timed by Napoleon's own pocket watch, began to rain down ion shells. They didn't aim for the soldiers. They aimed for the ground behind the enemy, cutting off their retreat. The explosions threw geysers of mud and body parts into the air. The smell of ozone was replaced by the acrid stench of burning plastoid and cooked flesh. It was a massacre. It was efficient. It was beautiful. The remaining stormtroopers, seeing their invincible walkers reduced to scrap, and their retreat cut off by a curtain of explosions, threw down their weapons. The will to fight evaporated instantly against the terrifying geometry of Napoleon's trap. Silence returned to the valley, broken only by the crackle of cooling metal and the groans of the wounded. Napoleon descended from the ridge, his boots finding purchase on the solid stones he had marked earlier. He walked through the carnage, his face impassive. His soldiers followed him, no longer looking at him with suspicion, but with a fanatical devotion bordering on religious awe. They had not just won, they had dominated. Napoleon climbed atop the smoking carcass of the fallen ATST. The metal was still warm under his boots. He stood high above the field of victory, the wind whipping his coat around him. He slipped his hand into his tunic, striking the pose that had defined an era on Earth, and looked up. Through the clearing mist, the sky revealed the pale, distant shapes of star destroyers orbiting the planet. They were massive, city-sized daggers capable of turning continents to glass. A lesser man would have felt small. Napoleon felt only hunger. "You have ships," he whispered to the silent void, his eyes burning with a cold blue fire. "You have legions, but you do not have me." He turned to his troops who were cheering his name, a garbled pronunciation of Bonaparte that sounded like a war cry. "Salvage everything," he ordered, his voice cutting through their celebration. "The walkers, the armor, the communicators. Today we took a valley. Tomorrow we take their sky. This is only the beginning." Chapter 4. Rumors of a new warlord. Coruscant was a diamond of light against the velvet black of space, a planet city that hummed with the heartbeat of 1,000,000,000,000 souls. Deep within the sterile Durasteel canyons of the Imperial Security Bureau headquarters, the air was cold and recycled, smelling faintly of ozone and ambition. Agent Callus sat in a darkened room, the blue glow of a holographic projector illuminating his furrowed brow. He was a man of logic, a hunter of patterns, but the pattern rotating before him made no sense. "Replay," Callus ordered, his voice crisp. The hologram flickered, showing a grainy, chaotic recording recovered from the helmet of a dead stormtrooper on Mimban. It displayed the misty valley, the mud, and then the impossible. The rebels were not scattering like rats. They were standing. They were standing in perfect shoulder-to-shoulder formation, a wall of mismatched armor defying the technological might of the Empire. Then came the volley, the synchronized flash of light that turned an ATST into slag. "It defies doctrine," a junior analyst muttered from the shadows. "Insurgents do not fight like this. They use hit and run. They use terror. This is formal warfare. Who fights a pitched battle against the Empire and wins?" Callus leaned forward, pausing the image on the figure standing atop the ridge. A small man in a long coat hand tucked into his tunic. "Someone who is not afraid of us," Callus said, his eyes narrowing. "They are calling him the General. Intelligence reports say he has reorganized the mining guilds and the local gangs into a single entity. He calls it La Grande Armée. A grandiose title for a band of mud-dwellers, the analyst scoffed. Is it Callus stood smoothing his uniform? He destroyed a heavy armor company in 20 minutes with inferior weaponry. This is not a rebellion, Lieutenant. This is a rival state in its infancy. Light years away on the bleak surface of Mimban, the industry of war had replaced the despair of the refugee camps. The captured mineral mine was no longer extracting ore for the Empire. It was forging a destiny. The sound of hammers and arc welders filled the air, a rhythmic industrial symphony that Napoleon found more soothing than any opera. He walked along the gantry overlooking the main foundry floor. Below him, hundreds of soldiers, Mimbonese humans and aliens, were working with zealous efficiency. They were painting their armor. The dull grays and whites of stolen imperial gear were being covered in striking coats of deep blue and gold. Napoleon had insisted on it. Uniformity bred pride. Pride bred courage. "They are learning," a gravelly voice said from behind him. Napoleon turned to face the speaker. It was a man encased in battered Katarn-class commando armor, the paint faded and scratched, marking him as a relic of a bygone war. Glitch, the clone commando, stood with the rigid posture of a man grown in a test tube for the sole purpose of killing. He was a defector left behind by an empire that had replaced quality with quantity. "They are not just learning," Commander Napoleon corrected, looking back at his growing legion. "They are remembering what it means to be men, not slaves. But they lack the instinct, the blood memory of war. I can teach them to shoot. I can teach them to breach," Glitch said, removing his helmet to reveal a face identical to millions of others, yet etched with a unique weariness. "But I cannot teach them to die. That is what you are doing." Napoleon studied the clone with genuine fascination. In Glitch, he saw the perfect soldier, loyal, skilled, and devoid of the messy political ambitions that plagued natural-born generals. Yet the clone was lost a weapon, without a hand to wield it. "You were bred in a laboratory to follow orders," Napoleon said, stepping closer, his presence commanding despite his lack of physical stature. "You were designed to be a tool. The Empire discarded you because they wanted cheaper tools. They insulted your purpose." Glitch's jaw tightened. "We were soldiers of the Republic. The Republic is dust." Napoleon's voice rose sharp and cutting. "And the Empire is a bloated corpse waiting to rot. You are looking for a cause, soldier. You are looking for a war that matters." He gestured to the blue and gold troopers below. "I am not asking you to fight for a flag. I am asking you to fight for perfection. You were born to obey. I was born to command. Together, we are the perfect mechanism of conquest." The clone looked at the small man, seeing the fire in his eyes, a fire that burned hotter than a blaster bolt. Slowly, Glitch nodded. "What are your orders, General?" Late that night, in the war room, carved from the rock of the mine, Napoleon stood before a massive star chart. The holographic galaxy spun slowly, a swirl of billions of stars. His officers, Glitch, the weak lieutenant, and the tactical droid, waited in silence. Napoleon traced the hyperspace lanes with a finger. "We have secured the ground. We have artillery. We have infantry. But we are trapped on this rock." He looked at the vast emptiness of space, the domain he had never conquered on Earth. The failure of Trafalgar, the limitation of the English Channel. Those ghosts haunted him still. He would not let them haunt him here. "The Empire dominates because it controls the void," Napoleon mused. "To defeat them, we must bridge the gap between worlds. We cannot build a navy from scrap metal." He moved his hand away from Mimban, tracing a line across the sector to a nearby system, a hub of industrial shipyards. Sullust Glitch identified the target. Heavily defended. Shipyards. TIE fighter production lines. "Defended by arrogance," Napoleon corrected. He looked at his reflection in the blue light of the hologram. "We need ships, frigates, corvettes, transports, and we will not build them. We will take them." He turned to his staff, his face set in stone. "Prepare the men. We are leaving the mud behind. It is time to teach this galaxy that water or vacuum is no barrier to French, to Grand Army ingenuity." Chapter 5. The Force is no magic. The expansion of the Grande Armée had pushed deeper into the equatorial belt of Mimban, a suffocating nightmare of twisted vines, bioluminescent moss, and incessant boiling rain. The humidity here was heavy enough to drown a man standing up. To the native Mimbanese, it was home. To the stormtroopers rotting in the mud, it was hell. To Napoleon, it was simply terrain difficult, obnoxious, but ultimately just another variable in the grand equation of conquest. He sat under the canvas awning of his command tent, a temporary structure erected on a plateau of black rock. On the table before him sat a bottle of stolen Corellian wine, its crystal neck sweating in the heat, contrasting with the crude Duracrete map weights holding down his charts. He took a sip, grimacing slightly. It lacked the body of a good Burgundy, but it served to sharpen the mind. A commotion at the perimeter broke his concentration. Shouts in Basic and Mimbanese echoed through the dense foliage, followed by the distinctive snap hiss of an energy weapon. It was not the crackle of a blaster. It was a hum, a low, vibrating drone that set one's teeth on edge. Napoleon set his glass down with deliberate slowness. He checked the priming on his pistol, stood up, and walked out into the downpour. His soldiers, the Blue and Gold Battalion, had formed a ragged circle around a solitary figure. They held their rifles, unsurely fear flickering in their eyes. In the center of the ring stood a young human male, no older than 20, cloaked in tattered brown robes that were soaked through with mud. In his hand, a cylinder of silver metal projected a blade of vibrant azure light. The rain hissed as it touched the plasma, evaporating instantly into steam. The boy moved with a fluid grace that was almost hypnotic, deflecting nervous blaster shots into the ground with casual flicks of his wrist. He was not attacking. He was demonstrating. "Cease fire," Napoleon's voice cut through the rain, authoritative and bored. The soldiers lowered their weapons, relief washing over them. Napoleon stepped into the circle, stopping just outside the reach of the glowing blade. He looked the intruder up and down, noting the desperation in the boy's stance, the hollowness in his cheeks, and the frantic hope in his eyes. "You are the warlord," the boy said, his voice cracking slightly before he steadied it. "The one they say defeated the walkers. I am Alara Vance, Padawan of the Jedi Order. I have come to offer my aid." Napoleon looked at the laser sword, then back at the boy's face. He did not look impressed. He looked disappointed. "I was expecting mercenaries. Instead, I get a monk with a glow stick." The Padawan bristled, the blue light of his saber intensifying. "This is the weapon of a Jedi Knight. I can feel the Force flowing through you, General. It surrounds us. It binds the galaxy together. With my help, you can—" "Stop!" Napoleon interrupted, holding up a hand. He walked around the Jedi, inspecting him as one would inspect a horse at market. "You speak of binding the galaxy. I am trying to conquer a sector. Tell me, boy, does this Force of yours provide logistics? Can it turn lead into bread? Can it reload a cannon when the supply lines are cut?" Alara deactivated his saber, the sudden silence deafening. "It is not a tool for such things. It gives us foresight, reflexes, power over the weak-minded." "Power," Napoleon scoffed, turning his back on the Jedi to return to his tent. "I have seen power. Power is a battery of 12-pounders firing canister shot into a rushing column. Power is a schedule kept to the second. What you have is a parlor trick. A dangerous one, perhaps, but a trick." "I can destroy a tank with my mind," the Jedi shouted, his composure slipping. Napoleon stopped. He turned slowly, a cruel gleam in his eye. He pointed a gloved finger toward a distant ridge about 600 meters away, shrouded in mist. "There is an Imperial listening post on that cliff. 3 sentries, a heavy repeater. If you are a weapon, prove it. Remove them. You have 2 minutes." The Padawan hesitated, looking at the distance, then at the skepticism on the general's face. He closed his eyes, inhaling deeply. Then he moved. He did not run. He surged. Using the force to amplify his speed, he became a blur darting through the jungle canopy. Napoleon lifted his spyglass, watching with cold calculation. He saw the blue flash ignite on the ridge. He saw the blaster bolts deflected. He saw the sentries lifted into the air by an invisible hand and tossed over the precipice like ragdolls. The heavy repeater was sliced in half, the metal glowing red hot. It took 90 seconds. When Alara returned, he was breathing hard, sweat mixing with the rain on his face. He looked at Napoleon, expecting awe, expecting reverence. Napoleon merely checked his pocket watch and snapped it shut. Inefficient, he critiqued. You exposed your left flank twice. If they had a sniper, you would be dead. And you wasted energy lifting them when a simple thrust would have sufficed. The Jedi stared dumbfounded. I cleared the post. You did, Napoleon conceded, pouring another glass of wine and offering it to the boy. But you did it with emotion. You fought like a hero. I do not need heroes. Heroes die gloriously and leave their armies leaderless. I need assets. Napoleon sat down, gesturing for the boy to sit on a crate opposite him. The dynamic had shifted. This was no longer a meeting of a mystic and a warrior. It was a job interview. Listen to me closely, Monsieur Vance Napoleon, said his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I do not care about your religion. I do not care about your light side or your dark side. To me, you are a piece of living artillery, a precision instrument to be applied where the line is weakest. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into the Padawan's soul. If you stay with me, you will not be a guardian of peace. You will be a jagged knife in the throat of the Empire. You will kill when I tell you to kill. You will retreat when I tell you to retreat. There will be no temples, only targets. Alara looked at the wine, then at the hilt of his lightsaber. He thought of his master gunned down by clones. He thought of the silence of the Force since the Purge. He looked at the strange small man who commanded respect from savages and droids alike. The order is gone, Alara whispered, taking the glass. There is only survival. Good, Napoleon smiled, clinking his glass against the boy's. Then let us discuss geography, and put that sword away. It ruins my night vision. Chapter 6. The Campaign of the Five System. The stars were no longer distant twinkling reminders of the impossible. They were now a map of conquest. In the span of 3 standard months, the insurrection of Mimban had metastasized into the campaign of the Five Systems. It was a conflict unlike anything the Outer Rim had seen since the height of the Clone Wars, but it lacked the endless grinding attrition of that era. This was speed. This was violence applied with the precision of a scalpel. Napoleon Bonaparte stood on the bridge of a captured CR-90 Corvette, now christened the Little Corporal. The hum of the hyperdrive was a vibration he felt in the marrow of his bones. He stared at the tactical plot, a 3-dimensional sphere of blue light that displayed the Sullust trade route. They are static. Napoleon observed, his voice calm amidst the frenetic activity of the bridge crew. The Imperial captains anchor themselves to the trade lanes like barnacles on a ship's hull. They believe their size is their protection. Target convoy entering real space in Sector 4. The Weekay lieutenant reported, now wearing a crisp uniform that strained against his bulky frame. 3 bulk freighters. Escort 2 Nebulan B frigates. The Glory and the Vigilance. Napoleon checked his pocket watch. Perfect. They are heavy. They are slow. Signal the fleet. We do not engage the freighters. We cut the head off the snake. The Imperial formation was standard freighters in the center, frigates on the flanks. It was a defensive box designed to repel pirates. But Napoleon was not a pirate. "Commence maneuver," Napoleon ordered. From the shadow of a nearby asteroid belt, the Grande Armée's fleet emerged. It was a ragtag collection of gunships and retrofitted mining vessels, but they moved with a terrifying synchronization. They did not attack the box. They swarmed the starboard frigate, the Vigilance, ignoring the rest of the convoy entirely. "Concentrate fire on the aft shield generators," Glitch's voice crackled over the comms from his position in a heavy fighter. Napoleon watched the display. The Imperial captain of the second frigate, the Glory, began to turn his ship to assist a slow, lumbering arc that would take minutes. "Too slow," Napoleon sneered, tapping the glass of the viewport. "They have bigger ships, but they have slower minds. They rely on the computer to calculate the turn. We rely on the eye." By the time the Glory had brought its guns to bear, the Vigilance was already dead in space, its engines disabled by a precise ion bombardment. Napoleon's forces immediately disengaged, swinging around the debris of the first ship to blindside the Glory from its exposed rear. It was a textbook defeat in detail, local superiority achieved through superior speed. The boarding actions were brutal and short. Napoleon's new old guard stormtroopers, who had defected and repainted their armor in the blue and gold of the French Empire, swept through the corridors of the Imperial frigates. They fought not with the suppression tactics of the Empire, but with aggressive bayonet point charges that broke the morale of the conscript naval crews. By the end of the week, the Vigilance and the Glory were scrubbed of their Imperial gray. They were repainted with the tricolor stripes on their hulls. They were renamed the Austerlitz and the Marengo. A third frigate captured in the bold raid on the Kuwait supply lines was named the Josephine. As the fleet regrouped, a transmission went out across the open channels of the 5 systems. It was not a demand for surrender. It was a chant, thousands of voices, strong broadcasting from the captured ships. "Vive l'Empereur! Vive l'Empereur!" The sound echoed through the comms of every trading post and smuggling den in the sector. It was intoxicating. For the first time in years, the people of the Outer Rim heard something other than the robotic order of the Empire. They heard the roar of a man who made kings bow. Far away in the governor's palace on Eriadu, the air was cool and smelled of expensive polish. Grand Moff Tarkin stood by the window looking out over the industrial smog of his homeworld. The report lay on his desk, a thick datapad blinking with high-priority encryption. "He has taken the Triellis trade route," Admiral Mahdi said, his voice laced with indignation. "He is taxing the shipping lanes, Governor. He isn't destroying the cargo. He's issuing protection permits stamped with an archaic crest. He acts as if he is a sovereign nation." Tarkin turned slowly. His skeletal face was unreadable, but his eyes were cold shards of flint. "He is not a pirate, Admiral. Pirates steal. This man is governing." Tarkin walked to the desk and picked up the datapad. He scrolled through the tactical analysis of the Battle of the 5 Systems, the flanking maneuvers, the use of gravity wells to disrupt formations, the psychological warfare. It was brilliant, and it was intolerable. "The local garrisons are incompetent," Tarkin stated flatly. "They are fighting a ghost who understands war better than they understand breathing. We cannot afford a symbol like this to endure." He pressed a button on his console. The holographic projector hummed to life, connecting to a frequency reserved for only the highest echelons of power. "Get me Lord Vader," Tarkin commanded, his voice dropping an octave. "Tell him we have a problem in the Outer Rim. Tell him the past has come back to haunt us." Chapter 7. The Shadow of Vader. The euphoria of the campaign of the 5 Systems died in a single heartbeat. On the bridge of the flagship Marengo, the chatter of victory was replaced by the shrill, rhythmic screaming of proximity alarms. Napoleon stood at the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the stars. But the stars were being blotted out. A dagger shape, vast and gray, sliced out of hyperspace. It was an Imperial I-class star destroyer, the Devastator. It dwarfed Napoleon's captured frigates, casting a shadow that seemed to swallow the light of the local sun. It did not hail them. It did not launch fighters. It simply hung there, a monolith of silent judgment. General the Weike lieutenant stammered, his leathery face pale, his hands trembling over the console. Sensors detect no fleet support. It is just one ship. Napoleon narrowed his eyes. One ship is enough when it carries a plague. He felt a chill run down his spine, a physical sensation he had not felt since the retreat from Moscow. It was not the cold of temperature. It was the cold of a grave being opened. The air on the bridge grew heavy, thick, and metallic. It tasted of ash. Napoleon realized with a sudden sinking dread that this was not a military engagement. This was a reckoning. The Devastator did not engage the fleet in orbit. It ignored the frigates as a lion ignores flies. Instead, it launched a single Lambda-class shuttle toward the mining outpost on the moon below, a critical supply depot for the Grande Armée. "Connect me to the outpost," Napoleon ordered, his voice tight. The main tactical holotable flickered to life, showing the grainy security feed of the outpost's landing bay. The shuttle touched down, steam hissing from its landing gear. The ramp descended into the swirling dust. "Open fire," the outpost commander shouted over the audio link. "Do not let them disembark." Napoleon watched as 50 of his best men, veterans of the Mimban trenches, opened up with heavy blasters and rotary cannons. The air filled with red plasma. And then a silhouette emerged from the smoke. Tall, clad in black armor, a cape flowing like liquid darkness. The figure did not take cover. He walked. He raised a gloved hand, and the blaster bolts simply stopped. They hung in the air for a fraction of a second before dissipating into harmless sparks. Then a crimson blade ignited with a sound that tore through the audio speakers. It was not a battle. It was a natural disaster. The figure moved with the unstoppable inevitability of a glacier. Men flew through the air, their necks snapped by invisible hands. Heavy blast doors crumpled like wet paper. The audio feed was filled with the terrifying sound of mechanical breathing coup-pas that drowned out the screams of the dying. The transmission from the outpost cut to static, replaced instantly by a high-resolution projection on the Marengo's bridge. The dark figure stood amidst the burning ruin of the command center, bodies strewn around his boots. He looked directly into the camera, and Napoleon felt the air in his lungs solidify. "You have played your game of toy soldiers long enough." The voice was deep, synthesized, and vibrated with the weight of a collapsing star. "I am Darth Vader." The crew of the Marengo cowered. Even the tactical droid took a step back, its logic processors overwhelmed by the threat assessment. Napoleon did not cower. He stepped into the blue light of the hologram, smoothing his coat though his heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. "And I," Napoleon replied, his voice steady despite the crushing pressure that began to squeeze his throat, "am the Emperor Napoleon. You strike terror into children, Lord Vader. But I have seen empires rise and fall. You are just another executioner in a mask." "You are an imposter," Vader intoned, raising his hand slightly. The image flickered. On the bridge, Napoleon gasped, clutching his collar as an invisible vice tightened around his windpipe. He was lifted an inch off the deck, his boots scuffing the metal. "Prepare your fleet for surrender, or I will turn this sector into a graveyard." A graveyard. Napoleon wheezed, his face turning red, forcing a smile through the agony. Is just silent territory. Vader lowered his hand. Napoleon collapsed to his knees, gasping for air, rubbing his bruised throat. The hologram vanished. The connection was severed. General Glitch rushed to his side, helping him up. We must evacuate the outpost survivors. The shuttle is still on the pad. Napoleon stood up, leaning heavily on the tactical table. He massaged his neck, his eyes watering, but the fear in them had hardened into something brittle and sharp. He looked at the moon below. No, Napoleon rasped. No evacuation. Leave them. Sir Glitch asked, horrified. Those are our men, the 4th Battalion. He is down there, Napoleon whispered, pointing at the moon. The monster is on the ground. We cannot beat him in a duel. He is not a man. He is a force of nature. Napoleon looked up at Glitch, his expression stony. But even a god cannot survive a mountain falling on his head. Order the fleet to target the canyon walls above the outpost. Load the ion shells. You are going to bury them, Glitch said, his voice trembling. I'm going to set a trap, Napoleon corrected, turning to the viewport. He expects fear. He expects us to run. He does not expect me to burn my own castle to kill the dragon. Chapter 8. Trap at the canyon. The canyon was a jagged scar on the moon's surface, a geological throat choked with high-density iron ore that scrambled sensors and turned tactical displays into static. It was the perfect place for an ambush or a grave. Down in the shadows, the 501st Legion moved with the silent lethality of an apex predator. Their blue-marked armor was dull in the twilight, blending into the rock. At their head walked Darth Vader, his cape sweeping over the gravel, his breathing the only sound louder than the wind whistling through the ravine. Vader paused. The force rippled around him, a disturbance in the dark water. He felt emptiness. The outpost ahead, nestled against the sheer cliff wall, felt hollow. There was no panic, no chaotic preparations for defense. Just a singular burning point of light waiting in the center of the compound. It is a trap, my lord, the clone commander Apo stated, scanning the rim of the canyon. Thermal reads are flat. They've abandoned the position. Not all of them. Vader rumbled, stepping forward. He did not care for traps. A trap implied that the prey had a chance to spring it. To Vader, this was merely a delay. He signaled the Legion to hold position. I will deal with the Jedi. Secure the perimeter. He walked alone toward the outpost gates, which hung open like a slack jaw. In the center of the muddy courtyard stood Ilara Vance. The Padawan looked small against the backdrop of the massive mining drills and Durasteel crates. He was not trembling. He had spent the last hour meditating, accepting the logic of the general. He was not a guardian of peace today. He was a coordinate, a fixing pin. You are a child, Vader said, stopping 10 meters away. His voice was not mocking. It was simply stating a fact. And you stand alone against the dark. Ilara ignited his lightsaber, the blue blade humming defiantly. I am not alone, he said, his voice steady. I am part of the Grand Battery. Vader tilted his head slightly. Then you will die with the rest of them. The Sith Lord lunged. It was not a duel. It was an execution. Vader's red blade came down with the weight of a collapsing star. Ilara blocked his knees, buckling under the sheer kinetic force. He parried, spun, and tried to find an opening, but fighting Vader was like fighting a hurricane with a stick. Vader didn't even use two hands. He drove the boy back step by step, forcing him toward the center of the kill zone. 30 seconds, Ilara whispered to himself, counting the beats of his heart. He needed to hold him for 30 seconds. High above in orbit, the bridge of the Marengo was silent as a tomb. The crew watched the chrono counting down. The targeting computers were locked onto the distress beacon Alara was carrying, not to rescue him, but to aim the guns. Target locked, the gunnery officer reported, his voice thick with guilt. "Sir, the comms." The boy is still transmitting. Napoleon stood by the viewport, his face a mask of marble. He did not look at the officer. He looked at the moon. He thought of the old guard at Waterloo dying in squares to buy him time to escape. He thought of the bridge at Arcole. War was the mathematics of sacrifice. "The queen is sacrificed to checkmate the king," Napoleon murmured. He gripped the railing until his knuckles turned white. He knew the price. Fire. General the 501st is retreating, but Vader is still. "I said fire," Napoleon roared, slamming his fist onto the tactical table. The Marengo and the Austerlitz shuddered as their turbolaser batteries and ion cannons unleashed hell. Green and blue beams of coherent energy streaked down from the heavens, tearing through the thin atmosphere of the moon. Down in the canyon, Alara Vance saw the sky turn green. He smiled a sad, peaceful smile. He dropped his guard, deactivated his saber, and looked Vader in the eye. "Check," he whispered. Vader looked up, sensing the catastrophe, a fraction of a second too late. The orbital bombardment did not hit the courtyard directly. It hit the canyon walls above them. Millions of tons of rock iron ore and unstable shale were instantly pulverized and detached. The mountain didn't just slide, it fell. A tsunami of stone and fire crashed down, burying the outpost, the Jedi, and the Sith Lord in a cataclysmic roar that shook the moon to its core. Dust billowed up into the stratosphere, a mushroom cloud of destruction. On the Marengo, the sensors went blind. "Impact confirmed," Glitch said, his voice hollow. "The canyon is gone. Filled in. No life signs." Napoleon let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. He adjusted his coat. "A tragic loss," he said, his voice devoid of emotion, but a necessary one. "Navigate us out of the gravity well." "We must." "Wait," the sensor officer screamed. "Contact subterranean movement." The pile of rubble, a mountain of loose stone, began to shift. It wasn't settling. It was being pushed. From the center of the devastation, a tremor rippled outward. Massive boulders weighing tons were blasted aside as if they were made of styrofoam. A red glow began to emanate from beneath the rocks, cutting through the stone like a welding torch. With a sound of tortured metal and screaming rage, the debris exploded outward. Darth Vader rose from the grave. He was a ruin. His helmet was cracked, revealing burned pale skin and a yellow, hate-filled eye underneath. His armor was shattered wires, sparking his cape burned away. His left mechanical arm was severed at the elbow, leaking hydraulic fluid. But he stood. He stood through sheer, unadulterated hatred. He looked up at the sky, at the fleeing ships, and raised his remaining hand. The force screamed around him, cracking the ground beneath his feet. On the bridge, Napoleon watched the magnified image on the screen. He saw the sparks, the wires, the metal skeleton beneath the flesh. The realization hit him like a physical blow. "He is not a man," Napoleon whispered, a dawn of horrified understanding breaking over his face. "He is a machine powered by hate." He turned to his crew, his eyes wide. "Full speed to hyperspace, go. We cannot fight that thing today." Chapter 9. The space Austerlitz. The void of space was usually cold and empty, but the Praterzan Nebula made it feel alive. It was a churning cauldron of violet gas and ionized dust, a celestial fog bank that stretched for parsecs. On the edge of this abyss, the battered remnants of Napoleon's fleet limped away from the moon of Mimban. They were bleeding coolant and venting atmosphere, a wounded animal seeking a dark hole to die in. Or so it appeared. From the hyperspace lanes, the executioner arrived. Not one, but 3 Imperial Star Destroyers reverted to real space, their wedge shapes cutting through the starlight with terrifying symmetry. The Executrix, commanded by Grand Moff Tarkin himself, led the formation flanked by the Accuser and the Adjudicator. They were pristine, massive, and invincible. On the bridge of the Executrix, Tarkin observed the fleeing rebel ships on his tactical display. He did not see an army. He saw vermin scattering before a light. "They are running for the nebula," Admiral Motti noted, sneering. "Their sensors will be blinded in there. They will be flying blind." "Precisely," Tarkin replied, his voice dry and sharp. "They are panicking. They hope the gas will hide them. Order the fleet to pursue at attack speed. Break formation and run them down individually. I want no survivors to carry tales of this Emperor." Deep inside, the violet haze of the nebula visibility was reduced to 0. Sensors were awash with static ghosting. The bridge of the Marengo shook violently as turbulence from the gas clouds hammered the hull. Napoleon stood gripping the comm station, his eyes closed. He was not looking at the screens. He was listening to the rhythm of the battle in his mind. "They are following," Glitch reported, his voice tense. "The destroyers have accelerated. They are opening the gap between their ships to cast a wider net. The Accuser is isolating the Josephine on our starboard flank." "Good," Napoleon whispered, opening his eyes. They shone with a predatory light. "They have broken their line. They have sacrificed cohesion for greed. They think this is a hunt. It is not." He turned to the helm. "Cut engines, all ships. Power down to emergency reserves. Let the nebula's drift carry us." "Sir," the helmsman looked terrified. "If we stop, we are sitting ducks. If we move, our engine signatures will pierce the interference," Napoleon snapped. "We become rocks in the stream, and we wait for the current to bring the enemy to us." The order went out. The Grande Armée went dark. The humming of the engines died, replaced by the eerie silence of the hull, groaning under the pressure of the nebula. They drifted ghosts in the mist, waiting for the Leviathans to pass. The Accuser roared through the gas, its massive ion engines churning the nebula into a frenzy. Its turbo lasers fired blindly into the purple gloom, searching for a target. The Imperial captain was frustrated. The rebels had vanished from the scopes. "Where are they?" he demanded. "Scan them." "Contact," the sensor officer screamed. "Range, point blank." "They are right above us." Napoleon had not just stopped. He had positioned his fleet in the 3-dimensional high ground of the gas cloud. As the Star Destroyer passed beneath them, exposing its dorsal hull, the command tower and the shield generators, the Marengo and the Austerlitz, powered up. "Phew," Napoleon roared. It was not a long-range duel. It was a knife fight in a phone booth. The rebel frigates unleashed a torrent of proton torpedoes and turbo laser fire straight down onto the unsuspecting Star Destroyer. The range was so close that the shields of the opposing ships scraped against each other, sparking like flint and steel. The Accuser's bridge tower vanished in a ball of fire before they could even raise their deflector screens. Leaderless and blind, the massive ship began to list its engines, firing erratically. "The Accuser is down." The cry went up on the bridge of the Executrix. Tarkin's face lost its composure for the first time. The nebula was flashing with explosions, lighting up the gas like a thunderstorm. "Recall the Adjudicator," Tarkin barked. "Reform the line. Get us out of this soup." But it was too late. Napoleon had executed the maneuver sur le derrière, the maneuver onto the rear. While the Accuser burned, the Josephine had swung around the flank and launched a suicide run at the Adjudicator. Ramming speed, the captain of the Josephine, a Duros veteran, ordered calmly. The frigate didn't hit the destroyer. It didn't have the mass. Instead, it drove itself like a spear into the exposed engine nozzle of the Imperial ship. The collision triggered a catastrophic containment failure. The adjudicator's rear section blossomed into a supernova of white light, the shockwave tearing the ship in half. Napoleon watched the destruction from the Marengo. His own ship was taking heavy fire from the executrix. Sparks rained down from the ceiling. Crewmen were thrown across the deck. "We have lost," the Josephine Glitch said, clutching his bleeding arm. "Shields are at 10%. General, we cannot take a hit from Tarkin's flagship." "We do not need to," Napoleon said, wiping soot from his face. "He is a politician, not a warrior. He sees the cost, and he will not pay it." Tarkin looked at the tactical display. 2 Star Destroyers lost. The enemy fleet was in tatters. Yes, the Josephine destroyed the Austerlitz, critical, but the rebels were still fighting with the ferocity of trapped rats. And somewhere in that gas was a tactician who turned standard Imperial doctrine into a suicide pact. "Pull back," Tarkin ordered, his voice icy. "Disengage. We will bombard the nebula from a distance." "But sir, we can finish them," Mahdi protested. "You may wish to die today, Admiral, but I have a station to command." Tarkin sneered. "Reverse thrusters." The executrix backed away, vanishing into the blackness of space, leaving the burning wrecks of its sister ships behind. On the Marengo, the silence returned. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. Napoleon walked through the smoke-filled bridge. He looked at the casualty reports scrolling on the screen. 60% of his fleet was gone. Thousands of men. "A victory," Napoleon murmured, looking at the drifting debris of the adjudicator. "But another such victory will undo us." He turned to his surviving officers. They were bloodied, exhausted, and staring at him with a mixture of terror and worship. "We have bought time," Napoleon announced, his voice weary. "Set a course for the unknown regions. We must disappear before the Emperor himself takes notice." Chapter 10. The Emperor's Call. The Imperial Palace on Coruscant was a spire that pierced the clouds, a monument to absolute authority, constructed upon the bones of the Republic. In the deepest sanctum of the spire, in the throne room, there was no sunlight. There was only the cold, artificial glow of the city planet below, filtered through diamond glass viewports. Emperor Sheev Palpatine sat upon his throne, a withered spider in a web of galactic proportions. The room was silent, save for the hum of the massive holographic projector in the center of the floor. It displayed the carnage of the Praterzan Nebula, the burning wreckage of the Adjudicator, the retreat of Tarkin's fleet. A lesser ruler would have been furious. Palpatine, however, was smiling. It was a thin, dry stretching of pale skin that barely touched his yellow eyes. He did not see a rebellion. He saw a variable. He saw a man who understood the geometry of power without the aid of the Force. A man who had broken Vader's legion and humiliated Tarkin's armada. "Connect me," Palpatine rasped, his voice, sounding like dry leaves skittering on stone. "My lord." A royal guard hesitated. "The frequency is encrypted." "It is a primitive analog signal." "Connect me." Palpatine repeated, a flicker of lightning dancing between his fingertips. The guard bowed low and scrambled to the console. Light years away on the bridge of the Marengo, the air was thick with the smell of ozone and burnt circuitry. The ship was limping through the void, its hull patched with scrap metal. Napoleon sat in the captain's chair, his eyes closed, his hand resting on the pommel of his sword. He was exhausted. The campaign had aged him. The thrill of victory was fading, replaced by the cold arithmetic of logistics. They were running out of fuel. They were running out of men. Suddenly, the main holotable, which had been dark since the battle, flared to life. It bypassed all security protocols, overriding the ship's systems with a brute force command code. The blue static coalesced into a hooded figure seated on a throne. The image was massive, projecting Palpatine so that he loomed over the bridge crew. General Bonaparte, the figure spoke. The voice was soft-cultured, yet it carried a weight that made the steel deck plates vibrate. Or should I say, Emperor. Napoleon opened his eyes. He did not stand. He remained seated, crossing his legs, projecting an air of casual indifference that he did not feel. I have received many calls today, monsieur. Most were surrender demands. One was a death threat from a cyborg. To which category do you belong? Palpatine chuckled a low, wet sound. I am the one who signs the checks for the cyborg general. I have watched your progress with great interest. You have done what the Jedi could not. You have brought order to chaos using nothing but will and gunpowder. I brought law, Napoleon corrected his gaze, locking with the hooded phantom. Your governors bring only extraction and brutality. Is there a difference? Palpatine leaned forward, his face obscured by shadow. We are men of vision, you and I. We understand that the galaxy is a beast that must be tamed. Tarkin is a sledgehammer. Vader is a blade. But you are an architect. The hologram shifted, showing a map of the outer rim. I have a proposition. You clearly struggle with resources. Your ships are dying. Your Grande Armée is bleeding. Why fight the inevitable? I offer you the title of Grand Moff of the Outer Rim. You will rule these sectors as you see fit. You will have my fleets, my factories, my infinite resources. All you must do is kneel. It was the ultimate temptation. Legitimacy, power, the ability to build the empire he had always dreamed of, backed by the industrial might of a galaxy-spanning civilization. All for the price of his pride. Napoleon stood up slowly. He walked to the edge of the projector, staring up at the giant figure. He thought of the Treaty of Fontainebleau. He thought of the island of Elba. He had been a prisoner of kings before. He knew the taste of a gilded cage. You offer me a crown, Napoleon said quietly, but it is a crown made of chains. You speak of order, but you rule through fear. I have studied your history. You destroyed the Republic from within. You are a parasite, monsieur. Palpatine's smile vanished. The temperature on the bridge dropped 10 degrees. You are a singular talent, Bonaparte. But do not mistake my generosity for weakness. You are a candle. I am the sun. I bring glory to my men, Napoleon declared, his voice rising, echoing through the silent ship. You bring them only silence. We are not the same. I would rather be a free man in a grave than a king in your puppet show. Then you have chosen your grave, Palpatine whispered. The malice in his voice was physical, a wave of dark energy that made the crew nauseous. Enjoy your victory, General. It will be your last. I am sending something final. The hologram cut out, leaving the bridge in darkness. Napoleon stood alone in the gloom. He felt a tremor in his hands. It wasn't fear of the man he had just spoken to. It was a strategic realization. Glitch Napoleon said, his voice hollow. He was not angry. He was dismissive. He has a weapon so large he does not need a fleet. What kind of weapon, Sir Glitch asked. Napoleon looked at the star chart, at the vast emptiness. A world killer. Chapter 11. The Exile's Gambit. The Marengo drifted in the void of the unknown regions, a silent speck of defiant metal against the canvas of infinity. Inside the ship, the air scrubbers were failing, the lights were dim, and the morale was brittle. Napoleon sat in his quarters, staring at a datapad that listed their remaining supplies. Rations for 3 weeks. Fuel for 1 hyperspace jump. Ammunition critical. He did not need a tactical droid to run the numbers. The equation was simple. They were dead. The Empire would not chase them. It would simply wait for them to starve or suffocate. Palpatine had been right. In a war of attrition, The galaxy always won against the exile. Napoleon stood and walked to the small viewport. He looked at his reflection, gaunt, gray-skinned, but his eyes were still burning with that terrifying, restless intelligence. He had lost armies before. He had lost entire countries. But he had never lost his voice. "Glitch," he said into his comm link. "Assemble the signals corps. I want every transceiver, every comm buoy, and every stolen HoloNet encryption key brought to the bridge." Sir Glitch's voice was confused. "Are we signaling for surrender?" No, Napoleon smiled, putting on his bicorn hat, a replica fashioned from black synth leather by a tailor on Mimban. "We are going to invade, not with ships, but with a virus." The preparations took 6 hours. The technicians, realizing the madness and the genius of the plan, worked with feverish intensity. They daisy-chained the reactors of the Austerlitz and the Marengo to the main communications array, creating a broadcast signal strong enough to punch through the background radiation of the entire sector. "We will burn out the transmitters in 10 minutes, the communications officer warned, wiping grease from his forehead. "After that, we will be deaf and blind. And the Empire will triangularize our position instantly." 10 minutes is an eternity for a man who knows what to say. Napoleon replied, adjusting the collar of his coat. He stood before the camera drone, the backdrop, a simple French tricolor flag he had kept folded in his breast pocket since Waterloo, now pinned to the bulkhead of a starship. He looked at Glitch, who stood by the door, rifle in hand. "This is the danger of the Empire, my friend. They believe that if they control the bodies, they own the souls. They have forgotten that a whisper can start an avalanche." "Ready to transmit," the officer said, his hand hovering over the switch. "Targeting everything. Public HoloNet, Imperial emergency frequencies, even the Bounty Hunter Guild channels." Napoleon nodded. "Execute." Across the galaxy, screens flickered. In the cantinas of Mos Eisley, the music stopped as the holoprojectors shifted from swoop racing to the image of a stern-faced man in archaic dress. In the pristine offices of Coruscant datapads buzzed with an unauthorized override. On the bridge of the executor, officers stared in shock as their tactical displays were replaced by the face of the rebel warlord. Napoleon did not shout. He did not scream. He spoke with the calm, measured cadence of a schoolteacher correcting a slow student. "Citizens of the galaxy," his voice echoed across 1 billion worlds. "You do not know me. I am a ghost from a forgotten time. But I know you." He leaned into the camera. "I see you working in the mines of Kessel. I see you bowing to men in white armor who cannot think, only obey. I see you trading your freedom for a safety that does not exist. The Empire tells you that order is peace. I tell you that order without liberty is a prison. They build stations the size of moons to frighten you. Why? Because they are afraid. A government that rules by the sword is a government that sleeps with one eye open." On Lothal, a young street thief named Ezra Bridger stopped running to watch the screen in a shop window. On Chandrila, Mon Mothma sat in her private chambers, her tea forgotten, listening to the rhetoric of a military genius who spoke of revolution not as a dream, but as a duty. "They call me a warlord." Napoleon continued, his voice rising in power. "But I seek no crown. I seek only to break the wheel. Look at your neighbors. Look at your brothers. Are they your enemies? Or are they just as hungry as you?" He pointed a finger at the camera, and it felt as though he was pointing at every soul watching. "The chains are only heavy when you kneel. Stand up if you have a blaster, use it. If you have a stone, throw it. If you have a voice, scream it. Vive la liberté. Vive la République vive. L'humanité." The signal cut. The transmitters on the Marengo exploded in a shower of sparks, melting into slag. The bridge went dark. For a moment there was silence in the galaxy. Then the alarms began to ring. In the ISB headquarters, panic erupted. Reports flooded in from 1,000 systems. Riots on Ryloth, strikes on Corellia, sabotage in the Quat drive yards. The message hadn't just been heard. It had been felt. Napoleon hadn't organized a rebellion. He had struck a match in a room full of gas. On the Marengo, Napoleon took off his hat and sat down. He looked at the smoking remains of the comms console. Now he said softly to Glitch, "They will come, all of them." "We gave away our position," Sir Glitch said, looking at the tactical scope, which was already lighting up with incoming hyperspace signatures. "The Empire is here. Let them come," Napoleon said, closing his eyes. "I have already won. I have planted the seed. Whether I am here to see the harvest is irrelevant." Chapter 12, St. Helena or Coruscant. The end did not come with a whimper, but with the roar of 1,000 turbo lasers. The Executor, Darth Vader's superstar destroyer, eclipsed the stars, its shadow falling across the crippled Marengo like a shroud. This was not a battle. It was an extermination. TIE fighters swarmed like angry hornets, picking apart the remaining plating of Napoleon's flagship. On the bridge of the Marengo, the alarms had been silenced. There was no point in hearing them. The crew droids and the few terminally wounded volunteers who had chosen to stay stood at their posts. In the captain's chair sat a figure wearing the gray overcoat and the iconic bicorn hat. He sat perfectly still facing the viewport as the green lance of a turbo laser battery charged up on the hull of the Executor. "Shields are gone." A medical droid reported, its voice calm. "Hull integrity at critical." From the shuttle bay of the Executor, a boarding craft launched, escorted by Vader's personal TIE advanced. The Sith Lord was coming to claim his prize personally. He wanted the body. He wanted to see the life leave the eyes of the man who had defied the Empire. As Vader's shuttle clamped onto the airlock, the Marengo shuddered violently. The reactor core rigged by Glitch's engineering team began a cascade failure. It wasn't a malfunction. It was a timed detonation. Vader strode through the blasted airlock, his lightsaber ignited. He cut through the blast doors of the bridge, stepping into the smoke. He saw the figure in the chair. He reached out with the force to choke the life from the insolent warlord. But he felt nothing. No fear, no heartbeat, no soul. Vader ripped the chair around with an invisible hand. The figure flopped loosely. It was not Napoleon. It was a B-1 battle droid, dressed in the general's coat and hat, a crude, masterful decoy. A recording played on the console next to it. "Checkmate, monsieur." Vader roared a sound of pure mechanical fury. He turned to run, but it was too late. The Marengo vanished in a blinding sphere of white light. The explosion was absolute. It atomized the frigate, sending debris spinning into the void at relativistic speeds. Vader's shuttle was buffeted by the shockwave, his shields flaring, forced to retreat to the Executor. In the silence that followed, a single object drifted through the vacuum, miraculously intact for a few moments before the cold claimed it. A black bicorn hat, spinning slowly alone in the dark. The official Imperial HoloNet broadcast declared a glorious victory. The newsreaders, with practiced smiles, announced the death of the mad insurrectionist of Mimban. They showed footage of the explosion. They claimed order had been restored. But in the shadows of the galaxy, a different story was being written. On the hidden rebel base of Dantooine, Mon Mothma sat with a datapad, reading a recovered manifesto. It was titled, "The Principles of Asymmetric Warfare" by N. Bonaparte. "He showed us it could be done," she said softly to a young Cassian Andor. "He showed us that the Empire is a machine, and machines can be broken if you find the right gear to jam." "He was a tyrant," Andor replied, looking at the tactical diagrams of the Mimban artillery trap. He sacrificed his own men. He was a necessity, Mothma countered. And now he is a martyr. The Empire killed the man, but they just immortalized the method. Across the outer rim, graffiti began to appear on stormtrooper helmets and garrison walls. A simple stylized silhouette of a hat, and 3 words, Vive l'Empereur. Deep in the unknown regions where the stars were sparse and the navigational charts were blank, a ship moved through the darkness. It was not an imperial design, nor was it republican. It was a sleek, predatory vessel modified with jagged schist technology and salvaged dura steel. On the bridge, the lighting was dim. Napoleon Bonaparte stood looking out at the swirling, chaotic anomalies of this uncharted space. He wore a simple tunic, now stripping away the pomp of the emperor persona he had worn for the cameras. Here, he was just a soldier again. Glitch walked up behind him, checking the readings on the long-range sensors. "We are clear, General. The Empire has stopped searching. They believe you are dust." "Good," Napoleon said, his eyes scanning the void. "Fame is a useful tool for recruitment, Glitch, but anonymity is the key to survival." "Where do we go now?" Glitch asked. "We have no army, no fleet. Just the old guard and this ship." Napoleon pointed to a sector of space on the screen where a strange, organic-looking distortion was rippling a hint of the Yuzhan Vong, or perhaps the Chiss ascendancy. A new threat, a new board. "We go to where the map ends." Napoleon smiled, and for the first time, it was a genuine smile of excitement. The Empire was a boring opponent, too rigid. But out here there are monsters, and I have always wanted to tame a monster. He turned back to the dark unknown, his hands clasped behind his back. Set course. A new conquest awaits. Napoleon has escaped to the unknown regions. Do you think he will join Thrawn or fight the Yuzhan Vong? Let me know your theory in the comments. And if you enjoyed this epic saga, smash that subscribe button for the next What If series.